Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley, an IFS-informed certified trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from survivors all over the world as they share their impactful story of thriving in their post-traumatic growth. We explore resources, tools, and coping skills to support the trauma survivor community. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley. I have with us today Myra Kynes, and Myra is a trainer at GERI, which is Gender Equity and Reconciliation International. We actually had on Desiree English, who works in the South Africa chapter for GERI as well a few weeks ago. She's also a leader in the BIPOC community, and she is a licensed American Baptist minister to youth and a recognized leader in the underserved communities, specializing in addiction, recovery, mental health, and domestic violence. Myra collaborates with the Black Ministerial Alliance and the Institute for Global Youth Programs. Myra is a mental health first aid and recovery coach, City of Boston trauma first responder, and she's been trained and certified by the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis and many more. She's co-authored the new book, Gender Equity and Reconciliation, and she joins us today from Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being here today. We really, really appreciate it. I'm so excited to kind of just dive in. These are super, super important topics. But before we dive in, you have so many accomplishments, so many titles. How did you get here? What was your journey like in getting here today?
How did I get here? I lived it.
Yeah.
Is probably the quickest way to say it.
Yeah.
Um, some people have impressive titles and, what schools did you go through and how did you get here? Mine was lived experience, faith, hope, and love. And so it was a no-brainer for me. I always knew. You mentioned that I'm a licensed minister. I bring all of me to wherever I am. And so, I couldn't have a conversation if I left a part of myself at the door. And what I realized in the story that I have, that is full of wonder, that I had to make sure that any little boy or girl that might have had a similar narrative, or even something different, that they had to know that there was hope out there, that they had to know that they could make it. And so there came a point in my life when I had, at that time, three small children. Um, yes, under the age of 5.
Boy.
Uh, I looked at them and, as I said, I don't leave a part of myself at the door. And I said, how can I expect to teach my kids obedience if I'm not being obedient to God? And at that very moment, I realized that I had to walk away from corporate America and to be the person that's here today. And that is to make sure that I am there for any and everyone who just needs a little extra love.
Yeah. Authenticity. That's what I hear through that thread of there, just being who you were meant to be. And I think the world is so hungry for authenticity right now. So thank you. I acknowledge you for being authentic all the way down to parenthood and ministry duties. So I love that. So tell us about your work. I'm really curious about the work that you do with the underserved communities and the addiction and mental health communities. What does that look like?
So again, so if I go back to, I've been a minister now officially for 23 years, and the church that I serve at has been in existence since 1805. We're an historic Black church in Boston, Massachusetts. The community that we sit in, though it's in the present time going through some gentrification, is predominantly African American, Caribbean, and Hispanic. And so I've grown up in that community. I'm an old youth minister. And so I have been at my church for over 50 years. And like many urban communities, there's just a lot of things happening under the surface and on the surface. And oftentimes people see the media presentation of what a community looks like, but just like in any home, there's grief and trauma and things that are happening. But in the communities that I serve, the resources don't necessarily get to the people, or there's historical um, things that prevent us from rising above the ashes. And so, because I have been in that community all my life as a child that's into an adulthood, it was the perfect opportunity for me to make sure that the community got the resources. Now, don't get me wrong, because I don't draw a line in the sand.
Mm,
So whether it's Boston, Massachusetts, whether it's New Hampshire, whether it's Connecticut, any and every resource that's available to help someone who might not know, I am there to share.
mm.
But it just so happens that I'm planted in the community that I also have my faith story.
Wow, that's really beautiful. You know, the work, I feel like it's a mission. It's been to me one of the most important missions that we've had as a country in this last decade is the BIPOC communities, you know, rising up, really being able to be heard, to be seen. Where do you feel like we're at with the trauma aspect in the BIPOC community? Because there's so much stigma there. There's a lot of mental health stigma, or there has been historically. You know, what is the temperature there, and what can we be doing to kind of help the BIPOC people continue to express themselves in that way?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, first of all, even the term BIPOC, right? Black, Indigenous people of color. There are
Mm,
people that might fit under that category based on the definition of those buckets, but may not associate within that category, right? The other thing is that when we say the word trauma, in some communities, it's just what life was. And so we have to be careful with the labels. I mean, I use the labels obviously because as you're on the world stage and you're talking about the resources, those are the words that I have to use. But really, we're talking about people's lives. And so when we talk about traditions, culture, all of those pieces, you can't forget that, right? Growing up in households where, basically you're taught as a young child, what happens here stays here,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Or if there's an issue around mental health, um, you know, you sort of just cover it up or just sort of ignore it because the last thing you want to do is be labeled as a child or as an adult of having those issues because what that might mean for the family in many aspects. So there is that stigma there, but I do think that there's a shift. I think that the stigma, it's still heavy with the older folks, like my generation, obviously generations before me, but the younger kids, I think, are getting it because we're talking a lot more about mental health. We're talking a lot more about self-care. We're talking a lot more about loving ourselves, right? So as we've gone through the generation, every generation has had their thing. This generation, including accessibility to the world stage and all that's going on, I think are far better off in being able to articulate what their needs are, even if they don't have the foundation. And so there is a voice that's there. And what we have to do is create those spaces, those safe spaces, and spaces that don't always mean a building, right? It means doing the work in yourself and marking yourself as safe. Um, that's, I think, the pulse that we're at now. The other thing is that I truly believe that in the old days, if I, again, you shared how old you were earlier, so I'm 60, right? In the old days, you were pointed to the professionals. In the new days, you really are looking at people with that lived experience. So if we look at there are programs that I work with around mentoring, and specifically mentoring young people that have had some system involvement. And the first thing I wanted to make sure is the mentors that we want to recruit, they're not going to pass a query, right? They're not going to pass any kind of system proposed criteria that says you can talk to a young person.
Right.
But they are the ones, the experts that need to talk. And so now there are a lot of programs rising up where the old mentor looks a lot different for young people that are in this particular grouping, even people who are outside, because I think oftentimes, again, we put lines in the sand and we think we're different, and we really aren't. You know, we all want to be loved. We all need to know that we're enough. We
Yeah.
all we need all of those things. And so, what I hope that I'm doing is being a bridge,
Mm,
right, from someone who lived it, someone who's come through it, and believing that I have some of the secret sauce, but not I am the healer, right? I'm just one of the many of the stories that can go, you come on, you can do it. You can do it, so.
Mm. Offering them a safe space. I love that. I like that you did like marking yourself as safe, like we do on Facebook after,
Right, right.
there's an earthquake or something. Um, I think that is really important because how we show up in the world can make a really big difference to those who are watching and those who need a helping hand, right? And creating
And
this
everyone's
stage.
watching.
Yes, yes.
Everyone's watching.
Everyone is watching. And I feel like there's not enough of these, the world stage has a lot to say. The world stage will cut your mic off if you go too long, right? But like I feel like finding places that give you the stage and give you the place and give you those resources to kind of mount up and take control. So in trauma recovery coaching, we're the same. Like you are not broken as my client. I am not here to fix you, but the healing work comes from all of your internal resources that you have already. I'm not going to offer you anything that is not going to that isn't already inside of you.
Right,
And so I love that aspect of the mentors coming in saying, I don't have that secret sauce, but I've been there and I've used my secret sauce to get to a place where now I can offer it backwards to you. So it's like, turning around and lending a hand. I love that you work with the youth because I think that's just such a game changer when younger people are able to find healing and to find, new patterns that maybe break those generational patterns and the generational traumas that happen, breaking those patterns and cycles that go on for generations. If they can break them so young, I feel like it's probably just saving them so much heartache, in their adulthood, or possibly passing it on to their next generation as well. So I really, really appreciate and acknowledge you for that work, because I know it's not easy working with youth. What would be something surprising that maybe people wouldn't assume about working with youth in this capacity?
Uh, I'm not certain that it's surprising. I think that we need to remind um, us folks who are no longer youth
Mm,
of that time when we were in that space, right? Because the reason that I love working with youth is because they're brutally honest.
mm,
They're raw, right? They haven't learned to put up the mask in many cases. The other thing is oftentimes the stuff that the adults are dealing with in their adulthood, or we are dealing with in our adulthood, is an extension of what happened in our childhood,
mm,
right? And so if it happened in our childhood and we were silenced, or we, somehow put it on a shelf, all of those things, we go through a whole lifetime trying to figure out why we're making decisions the way we're making them, and what could we do? But if we can tap into a young person's life at the moment that they're going through it, and
yeah,
again, offer the safe space and the resources, and to counter the stuff that is not true. And even if it happened, as it's not your identity, right?
right, right.
That to help them navigate that, whether in the process or as they move through the process, then it prepares them so much more for when they really are adulting. Um, and it's not to say, because when I work with young people, first of all, they're always surprised at how old I am, because I have the energy of a 5-year-old, right? And so it's one of those things when you speak to them, you listen to them. I can't tell you know, how to fix it, just as you were saying earlier. But I do know what's possible. So we should be their biggest cheerleaders. But part of doing that is, again, remembering, taking a moment to remember even some of the things that we've come through. And I'm in the process of creating a web space of, growing through what you go through, right? And making sure that we don't get stuck in one place, because as long as you're breathing that air, that water, that sunshine, you are being watered and you are growing. And so babies and young people are my favorite people.
Mm,
Um, old people are okay, like me, but sometimes we get stuck in our ways. And so, to that end, remembering that humility and remembering that we've gone through what we've gone through and are still here. So the young people are going to be all right as long as we don't forget them, because they're not lost. They're right in front of us.
right, right. Oh, that's so beautiful. It's almost like offering them a different perspective, because when
Mm.
they're in it, when you're kind of inside of that, like they say, the frogs with the boiling water, right? If you're already in the pan, you don't
Right.
necessarily know. And so offering them that more mature perspective so that they can see it at an earlier age, because they'll get there in years down the road, but there could be some damage that might not be able to be undone by then, or consequences or issues from there. So that different perspective, I think, is really, really beautiful. And it doesn't sound like you need to do a lot of hand holding, because they're eager. I hear like they're more eager, they're looking for something to be different with them.
Yeah, you don't have to do a lot of hand holding, but you do have a ministry of presence,
Mm,
right? So, to that end, so that they know they're not alone, because as we encourage and say to them, it's inside of you, there are times that you got to recognize that the insides get tired,
yeah.
right? And that's when you need to know that, you know what, there's a whole village behind me, or, there are other folks that I've learned that has my story and they're still here. I mean, all that you can pour in to anyone. They may not need it today, but they could use it 3 weeks from now, is the space that we try to create. And it's, again, acknowledging that even everything that we go through is for a purpose, right? And creating that space and that listening ear. So I try to not talk as much when I'm with young people. I try to listen. And I think with the exception of doing the podcast, I think I do that in general,
Yeah.
um, because that's the only way that you get to really hear and see what's going on, as opposed to believing that, you have the answer. I don't put a cape on, I'm not a superhero. So,
Yeah. I think you're a little bit of a superhero, but I think we're all capable of a little superhero. One of the titles that you do hold is mental health and first aid recovery coach. That's one of your many, many titles that you have. Is that like crisis work? Like, what kind of work is that?
no, so back then, I think it was 2012. I went through recovery coach training that helped folks, again, develop a plan if they were in addiction, and um, stressing again that I don't create the plan, but that I walk alongside of them. And so, in terms of ministry, when I have folks who might share that they have issues around addiction, we'll create opportunities. So, an example, as a minister, every year, I do a youth rally for back to school, and we give out school supplies. The past 3 years, when someone has come to the rally, I get a story from a mother or a sibling that they just lost their brother or their child. And some will come to me and say, I'm struggling. And so one young person this year came to me, and she had the memorial button on. And the kid used to come to the rallies, and he said he overdosed. And I said, okay. I said, so what are you doing now? And they shared that they were going to start therapy and they were looking for help. Now, the Ministry of Peoples, even though NA and AA is anonymous, I happen to know who's in recovery. And so, in addition to buying recovery Bibles and speaking to this person, I said, would you meet with young people, and maybe, we have what I call the living room, have a space where they can come and just share, knowing that the ones that might come are struggling with how to deal with addiction. So I don't have a direct history of substance use. I am the daughter of an alcoholic father, and have had loved ones in my life that struggled with addiction. Um, and I know there's only so much that I can do, but I also know the importance, again, when the voices of the addiction come in, that it could easily, someone could look at me and go, well, you don't understand. So I want to make sure that I put in front of them someone that does understand. I also understand, though, that we all go through a form of recovery. And so I share the little that I share, but I try to listen as much as I can to do a good match in the recovery process, and then be there to help them um, uh, work their plan, I guess, is the best way to do it. If they need sort of a coach or someone that's cheering them on, there's a program called ROCA in Boston that works with proven risk individuals. And in their statement, they're saying we are relentless with our young people, and they expect them to fall. And when they fall, they'll be there. to accept them back into the program. So we never kick them out. If you talk to any of my ministry kids, I tell them, once you're mine, you're always mine. There is nothing in your life that you can do. You are not that bad to stop me from loving you. And they know that that's the truth. 23 years later, I have what were children and youth, now parents, who are
With
coming
children and
with their
youth.
children, right? It's
Wow.
a program. So
Wow. That's a real full circle moment right there,
it
you know,
is. That's
to
how you know you're aging.
yes. Well, and it also knows it tells you that you're doing something right, right? Because they're still coming back and they felt the benefits of these types of programs. And I'm hearing a lot of like what I imagine people when they're working with you and your organizations are feeling is a connection, like just a really deep connection because you're going to really dark deep places with people, and obviously you're holding space and you're doing these wonderful things, but just you're even trying to connect them with people who have a similar story to them, which, as you know, immediately resonates with someone. And maybe you can't sit in that space with them if your story doesn't resonate with them, and so you're even connecting them with people where they can have more resonance so that they can be more open and more vulnerable and then flourish more and do more deep healing. You know,
Right.
that's a gift. You're very gifted in that, you know, bringing people together. And I love the program that you were mentioning that has the expectation of falling, of, you know, struggling, because I feel like there's a lot of households where that's such a shock for people, especially when their children end up that, what do you mean we didn't plan for this? That's not what this is. But if you're already going in saying, we recognize all of these, you know, other worldly, you know, situations that you have that may have set you up for this kind of, whether it's generational or just their community,
Mm.
we're going to be here if and when. And then that, I would imagine that takes away so much judgment because you're in there in a group with people who are ready to catch you, and they had all the resources and everything laid out to protect you when you fall, rather than being shocked and, you know, deteriorated because, oh my god, not my baby, you know. So what a beautiful sentiment to kids to know that they have a safe place, to individuals to have a safe place, you know. That is really, really beautiful. Myra Kynes, you are quite amazing. We love to focus here on resources. You have given us so many great resources already for multiple communities of people. What would be some of the resources that maybe you would offer someone who's maybe struggling in an area of, you know, inequity or addiction or mental health struggle?
Yeah, so there are a lot, and if you permit me to send the information to you post this session, I'm happy to
Yes.
do that.
Yes, and I'll
Um,
link everything in the show notes when it goes live. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a number of organizations that I have either worked with or spoken with the survivors. One in particular is called Legacy Lives On.
Mm.
The founder of it is Clarissa Turner. Her son was murdered, executed some years ago, and she started the Legacy Lives On for surviving mothers that turned into surviving the world. And so she has a presence on Facebook where she sends daily positive thoughts. But also, Legacy lives on whenever there's something that happens, not even just within Boston, but that's where they're based. Um, they go out and they go to the homes of just recent families that have lost their loved one to homicide. So that is an amazing resource. It is faith-based, but she is not a church. But what drives her, which is very much what drives me, is our belief in God. And so she would be, Clarissa Turner would be the first person that I would think of, and Legacy would be that group. And they meet on a regular, and folks come in and they share their story around loss. When anniversaries come up, they support one another. So Legacy is definitely one of those. There's a um, group called, a ministry called Can We Talk? It's out of the Roxbury. Um,
I've seen logos for this. Yes. We're
yeah,
both in
so
the New England, Boston area. Yeah.
so they started in Roxbury Presbyterian Church. It's now, I think, and I'm trying, and I know it from its early beginning. So getting like the new names, I might mess up, but I think it might be. the social Rockspace Social Impact Center, but I will get that information for you. And they've now recently branched out to youth talks as well. But
Mhm.
it's a space not only around situations such as homicides, but just grief in general. And so they have speakers, they have special programming, and they meet, I believe, weekly to offer space during COVID. Like everyone else, they went online, but they do have in person. With Legacy Lives On, they were meeting in a library, even during COVID. And again, so if someone reaches out, they would tell you what that schedule is. So those are probably the strongest two. That I would mention only because they are very much rooted, and the people that are involved have lived the trauma. And you know, just turned it around to say, I will not get stuck in this pain,
Yeah.
but I will make sure that I am available for anyone else. And with even Legacy Lives On, because Clarissa's son was murdered, she has now gone into schools to talk to young people about, fear and gang violence and loving. And if you, I don't know if it's on, I don't know if it's online. I attended the trials.
Mhm.
Um, she stood before her son's shooters and said, I forgive you.
Mm.
So she was one of those mothers that was able to just stand in as much pain that she was in. She also recognized the pain in the shooter.
Mm.
And I think that, programs that um, can take away sort of the victimhood
Yeah.
and look at the humanity on both sides, because on all sides, whether you are the cause of someone's trauma or whether you are the one that has received it, you're someone's son or daughter, mother or father. And so finding that space, right? Finding a mediator that can sit with you is a point of healing. Um,
Mm.
there are ministries around Boston that do various things, whether it be recovery or um, dealing with trauma. They're very there's a stretch of them. Like I keep worksheets and do calls to see whose group is going.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so it's too hard to list, but you know, faith-based and community-based, which is probably the best way to describe my work. It's faith in the community, right? Making sure that that intersection happens because we aren't separate, and everyone and anyone can choose what they choose to believe, but everyone deserves love and dignity and support. And so that's what bringing the faith, because for me, faith is about love, not judgment, is bringing that into community.
Beautiful. Myra Kynes, a connector, a resourcer for sure. I love this conversation. This has been super helpful, really insightful. And I really want to honor the work that you do because it is, the faith and community part is important. The community inside of faith is also important. And you're bridging gaps between multiple areas where there is generally a lot of deficits. And so I just want to applaud you for that. I know that you have helped author the book Gender Equity and Reconciliation that Jerry's organization put together. It was a multi-authored book. So tell people where they can find that book, and then any ways that they could reach out to you or see more about the work that you're doing.
So I actually am so glad that you allowed me to do that. So for Gender Equity and Reconciliation International, just as we had talked about earlier, that is a safe space,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's around the globe.
yeah.
And just very quickly, I got involved with Jerry in 2018. And I went there because I was working on this personal project of whether or not churches were safe spaces. And I saw this flyer. Well, someone sent me the flyer actually of this thing called Gender Equity and Reconciliation, and they had in it safe space. But what got me was the safe space and the reconciliation. It's having those difficult conversations, those taboo conversations across the gender spectrum.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm gonna go because it was 3 days, and in that first day, people were opening up their hearts
Mm.
and telling their stories as if they had known each other for a lifetime. And I said, they got it. And part of the reason that I think Jerry works is just as you and I are having this conversation here, This is the work that we do as trainers and facilitators to begin to put together those spaces to invite folks in to share their story. And so when you glance through the book, if you decide to look at the book, if you want to contact me, there are examples in the book of people who have maybe held their stories for years, and then their heart just broke open when they found that space of belonging. And Jerry is not like it's therapeutic, but it's not therapy, right? And so it's not, you have to come in and be a person of a particular faith. We don't push any of that on you. What we do is put the heart in the center of the floor. And so it is a beautiful community. There are all types of ways that you can engage. I happen to be the BIPOC intersectionality lead. And as I said earlier, that's because I don't want anybody to leave themselves at the door in terms of their story. But I also want to make sure, because of the BIPOC community, that's not a typical space that we always feel comfortable going in, that I have a seat for them right next to me. Um, we have LGBTQ plus, we have Jerry, South Korea, Latin America. There is a space for anyone who dare to tell their story. And even you can experience it just by coming to what we call a Jerry taster, even though I call it a Jerry snack. It's coming to experience a little bit about it to find out, can I do this? But I will say that you can. So, Jerry, we have a website, the www.GR World, and I will confirm all of these and send them to you. And you will be able to order a book. And if you don't have a book, Sarah, I will personally send you a book.
Oh, thank you so very much. I appreciate that.
So you send me your address, and I would love to get you a book. And also, I would love to invite you to one of the Jerry Tasters. There's no charge. You just come and you can experience it. And it's people from every walk of life, but you might be surprised that you might find your story in someone else and realize I wasn't alone, you know. And then, what do you do from there is up to you.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to have your bio linked on the Jerry website, and I'll have all of your contact information linked up there, and the link for the book as well. I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. Such an important conversation, and we're bridging gaps together. So thank you so much for
Absolutely.
joining. Have a great
Thank
rest of
you.
your day. Take care.
As you, don't forget to send me your address.
I will. All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and follow. For any information that was discussed in this podcast episode, check out the show notes below. Until next time, be well.